Most systems fail because they're inefficient. China's problem is the opposite. It became too efficient, too optimized, too dependent on one way of growing, too good at doing the same thing over and over again. And when that kind of system hits its limits, it doesn't adjust smoothly. It keeps pushing in the same direction, even when that direction stops working. China didn't build a broken economy. It built one that worked exactly as designed. A machine engineered for speed, scale, and relentless cost compression. For decades, that machine delivered results that stunned the world. Hundreds of millions lifted from poverty. Cities assembled almost overnight. An industrial base so vast that it didn't just compete in global trade, it reshaped the rules of global trade itself. But here's the thing about machines built for one purpose. They don't know when to stop. And right now in 2026, that machine isn't slowing down. It's accelerating into a wall. All right, let's break it down. To understand what's breaking, we first need to understand what was built and how deliberately it was constructed. China's economic transformation didn't begin with some grand free market revolution. It began with a controlled experiment. In the late 1970s, after decades of Maoist upheaval, a group of farmers in Zhaogang village quietly divided collective land among households, and then suddenly, output surged. The lesson was simple. You give people a stake in the outcome, and they produce more. Beijing noticed, and rather than open the floodgates, it did something far more strategic. It created test zones. By 1980, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Shantou were designated as special economic zones, built to trial, quote, special policies and flexible measures without risking the broader system. The idea was elegant. You isolate a space, suspend certain rules, measure success in growth and exports, and if it worked, you'd replicate it everywhere. Shenzhen became the poster child. In 1979, it was a fishing settlement of roughly 30,000 people near Hong Kong. Within 3 decades, it exploded into a megacity of over 10 million. Researchers have described it as an instant city. Growth so rapid that it risked becoming a victim of its own success. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. But the factories and export zones were only what you could see from the outside. Underneath, there was something far more powerful. Institutional architecture. A set of hidden mechanics that made the whole system run. And once you understand these mechanics, you're going to understand why the machine became so hard to stop. First, there was labor. China's hukou system, its household registration framework, controlled who could access public services and where. In practice, it allowed the state to mobilize one of the largest movements of people in modern history. By the end of 2025, China had more than 300 million migrant workers, with 180 million working away from their home regions. That's a labor force larger than the entire population of Bangladesh, moving where the machine needed them, when the machine needed them. Second, there were the local governments. After tax reforms in 1994, local officials found themselves with more spending obligations than revenue. The solution? Sell land to developers, compete for investment, and demonstrate growth at all costs. GDP became a performance metric, and local leaders were rewarded for delivering it. Academic research has documented how career incentives and tournament-style competition between cities drove officials to chase growth numbers, sometimes even manipulating statistics to look good. And third, you had investment. Massive, sustained, and relentless. In 2024, gross capital formation still sat at around 41% of GDP, roughly double the rate of most developed economies. When demand is strong, that level of investment fuels productivity. When it weakens, it becomes a pipeline of excess. The machine wasn't accidental. It was constructed. Labor made mobile, but controlled. Local governments incentivized to build, and finance structure to keep capital flowing, even when the returns started to fade. But here's where things start to turn, because a machine that can't stop building eventually builds too much. And what happens next is something that economists have studied for decades, but rarely at this scale. Overcapacity isn't just too many factories. It's a mismatch. Supply that outstrips what buyers can absorb at prices that make a profit. And in a system where shutting down production threatens jobs, debt repayments, and political careers, firms don't stop when the market tells them to. They keep running. They cut prices. They fight for survival rather than for innovation. The Chinese have a word for this, neizhuan, often translated to involution. It originally described agricultural societies where more effort produced no more output. People working harder and harder, just to stay in place. In today's China, it describes industries that are locked in a death spiral of price cutting and overproduction, where competition doesn't drive progress, it drives everyone closer to collapse. The Federal Reserve Bank has described it as, quote, disorderly price competition, linked to overinvestment and producer price deflation, enabled by zombie lending, banks rolling over debts to avoid recognizing losses. Now, we've seen earlier versions of this cycle play out. After the massive stimulus of 2008, China's steel production exploded from around 100 million metric tons in 1996 to 627 million by 2010. When growth slowed, capacity utilization crashed below 70% in 2015. Coal followed the same pattern, dropping from above 90% utilization to around 65%. Both sectors accumulated enormous corporate debt. The government responded with supply-side reforms, shutting mines, closing zombie factories, forcing capacity reductions. It was economic triage on a national scale. But here's what makes the current era different and far more dangerous. The overcapacity hasn't stayed in old industries. It migrated into the technologies the world actually needs. Solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles. The same machine that once flooded global markets with cheap steel is now flooding them with cheap green technology. And the numbers behind that shift, they're staggering. But we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. Let's start with solar. China invested over $50 billion in solar manufacturing capacity since 2011, roughly 10 times of what Europe spent. Today, China controls more than 80% of every key stage of solar panel production, from polysilicon to finished modules. That dominance helps slash solar costs worldwide, making it one of the cheapest electricity sources on the planet. But dominance came at a brutal price. By early 2025, solar module prices had crashed to historic lows, between 7 and 9 cents per watt, down from 25 cents in 2021. Manufacturers weren't just competing, they were hemorrhaging cash. In the first half of 2025, the top 4 Chinese module manufacturers posted combined losses of $1.54 billion. Some of the biggest names in the industry, Jinko Solar, Longji, JA Solar, they collectively shipped over 100 gigawatts of modules, yet saw revenues collapse by 15 to 36%. Polysilicon prices stayed below production cost for over a year, with at least 4 producers suspending operations entirely. Module operating rates among leading manufacturers dropped from 55 to 60% by mid-2025. China's own government stopped calling it overcapacity. The preferred term became irrational competition. In July of 2025, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology summoned 14 major solar companies to an emergency meeting, urging them to stop the bleeding and align production with actual demand. Batteries tell the same story on a different scale. Lithium-ion battery prices have collapsed over the past 15 years, falling from around $800 per kilowatt hour to just $84 per kilowatt hour in China in 2025, with some stationary storage cells hitting as low as $36. China holds roughly 83% of global battery production capacity, but in 2023, excluding portable electronics, Chinese factories used less than 40% of their maximum output. By 2025, projected capacity had ballooned to 4,800 gigawatt hours, roughly 4 times actual demand from EV makers. That's one of the most severe overcapacity situations in modern industrial history. And electric vehicles? Well, China accounted for just under 60% of all new electric car registrations globally in 2023, with 8.1 million sold, up 35% from the year before. That was also the first year that China's EV industry operated without national purchase subsidies, meaning the market was supposed to stand on its own. But instead, the IEA described it as entering a phase of increased price competition and consolidation. High levels of overcapacity have slashed producer margins and now threaten firms that can't find customers beyond China's borders. The battery supply chain is even more vertically integrated in China than in the West, which sounds like an advantage until you realize that integration means losses cascade through every link in the chain simultaneously. Hey, if you're finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. We go deep on the forces that are reshaping global power every week here on Fall of Nations. Now, here's the paradox at the heart of all of this. China has genuinely won the green technology race. It makes the panels, the batteries, the cars. It's driven costs down for the entire planet. But winning that race while destroying profitability isn't a victory. it's a trap. Because when margins collapse, companies can't reinvest. When companies can't reinvest, innovation stalls. And when government has to step in to keep bleeding industries alive, well, the whole system starts eating itself. And that brings us to what might be the most alarming part of this story: the financial scaffolding holding the machine together. In 2024, total profits of China's major industrial enterprises fell 3.3% year on year. Now that might sound mild until you look beneath the headlines. Profits in the ferrous metal smelting and pressing industry crashed 54.6%. Automobile manufacturing dropped 8%. Across the board, accounts receivable were rising. Finished goods were piling up in warehouses, and costs per unit of revenue were climbing. The profit rate of business revenue fell again. This isn't an economy failing to produce. It's an economy producing under conditions that systematically destroy profitability, and by extension, wage growth and private investment incentives. Meanwhile, China's headline GDP numbers still look decent. Official growth hit 5% in 2025, meeting Beijing's target. But even the IMF acknowledged the quality behind those numbers was deteriorating. Inflation averaged 0 for the year. The GDP deflator, the broadest measure of prices in the economy, declined for 10 consecutive quarters. Producer prices fell for more than 3 years straight. In plain terms, China was growing in volume while shrinking in value. That's not health. That's a machine running on fumes. But the real amplifier, the thing that turns a slowdown into a potential crisis, is local government debt. Remember those officials competing to build and grow? Well, they funded that growth through local government financing vehicles, or LGFVs, special entities that could borrow money without it appearing on official balance sheets. After the 1994 tax reforms left local government short on cash, LGFVs became a workaround. A Reserve Bank of Australia study describes how these vehicles were created specifically to finance infrastructure when direct borrowing was restricted. The problem is that many LGFVs never developed viable business models of their own. A Bank for International Settlement study analyzing thousands of these vehicles over more than a decade found that since 2014, many evolved into sprawling conglomerate platforms with diversified investments, but over-diversification became a curse, raising local debt levels and crowding out private investment. It's the institutional skeleton of involution. When the state's financial organs are built to keep investment moving, they keep capital circulating even when returns diminish. The IMF's February 2026 consultation laid it out in stark terms. China's property adjustment and spillovers to local government finances amid a debt overhang have contributed to weak domestic demand and deflationary pressures. The current account surplus hit an estimated 3.3% of GDP in 2025, a clear sign that domestic weakness was being papered over by export strength. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva was blunt. Domestic demand has been persistently weak. The property sector remains on a shaky footing, and the economy needs more forceful action with greater urgency. When the IMF tells you to act with greater urgency, you know the situation is not under control. Now, here's the feedback loop that keeps the machine trapped. Shutting down capacity costs jobs. Job losses threaten social stability. Social instability threatens political legitimacy. So the pressure is always to keep building, keep lending, keep producing, even when the returns no longer justify it. The economic cost of continuing can be high, but the political costs of stopping feel higher. Motion is easier to justify than contraction. And just when you think the pressure couldn't get worse, demography enters the picture. China's population fell by 3.39 million in 2025, the fourth consecutive year of decline and the steepest drop on record outside of famine years. Total births collapsed to just 7.92 million, the lowest figure since records began in 1949, and a 17% plunge from the year before. Deaths rose to 11.31 million. The natural growth rate hit negative 2.41 per thousand. The working age population, those aged 16 to 59, shrank by approximately 6.6 million in a single year. That's like losing the entire workforce of a mid-sized European country every 12 months. Those aged 60 and above now number 323 million, making up 23% of the total population, up a full percentage point from just the year before. To put that into perspective, China now has more people over 60 than almost the entire population of the United States has citizens of any age. The machine was built for a young, growing workforce that could fill factories, depress wages, and fuel output. That workforce is vanishing, and no policy can reverse it fast enough. Despite Beijing's most wide-ranging push to boost births, including cash subsidies of 3,600 yuan per child per year, the fertility rate continues to fall. Urban youth unemployment remains stubbornly elevated, with the jobless rate among non-student 16 to 24-year-olds sitting at 16.9% as of late 2025. Marriage registrations plunged 20% in 2024 alone, the steepest annual drop on record. However, registrations rebounded in 2025 to 6.76 million, an 11% increase driven by administrative reforms, cultural factors, and pro-family policies. Young Chinese aren't refusing to have children out of ignorance. They're just making a rational calculation in a system where raising a child to adulthood costs an average of 6.3 times per capita GDP, which is higher than in most developed nations. Every retiree who exits the workforce is one less contributor to the pension system and one more person drawing from it. Every year of population decline tightens the labor market. It raises dependency costs and weakens the consumer demand the machine desperately needs to sustain itself. In the 1980s, China had roughly 8 working-age adults supporting each retiree. Today, that ratio has collapsed, and by the mid-2030s, projections suggest that it could fall to just 2. That's not an economy that can power a machine built for relentless expansion. It's an economy running out of the fuel it was designed to burn. This pattern, a system that succeeds so completely that it creates the conditions for its own constraint, isn't without precedent. Britain's coal industry once sat at the center of global power. In 1913, the country operated over 2,500 mines, producing 290 million tons, 30% of it exported. It was the dominant energy supplier on the planet. But when export markets shifted and sales stagnated, all that capacity became a milestone, an excess of mines and a superfluity of workers, as historians described it. Unemployment became endemic in mining regions. Political battles over wages and restructuring consumed a generation. The lesson wasn't that coal was bad, it was that a national industrial advantage can become socially explosive when market conditions shift and the cost of adjustment concentrates in specific communities. Japan offers a different but equally uncomfortable warning. After its asset bubble burst in the early 1990s, the economy entered what economists call a lost decade. Years of stagnation, deflation, and painful balance sheet repair. The parallels with today's China are hard to ignore. An economy built on high investment, a financial system loaded with unrealized losses, a property market that went from driving growth to dragging it down, and the persistent difficulty of escaping low inflation conditions once expectations adjust downward. Japan's experience shows that even wealthy, technologically advanced societies can get stuck, not in a dramatic crisis, but in a long, grinding drift. These aren't predictions, they're patterns, and patterns have a way of repeating when the underlying mechanics are similar. So where does this leave us? China's efficiency machine was built through policy experimentation, labor mobilization, investment intensity, and deep global integration. It delivered real achievements. Hundreds of millions of workers absorbed into urban economies, cost declines in technologies that matter for the planet's future, and an industrial system that's capable of scaling at extraordinary speed. Nobody serious denies that. But that machine's greatest strength, its ability to expand supply relentlessly, has become its most dangerous weakness. When domestic demand weakens, excess capacity doesn't vanish, it exports itself. And China's current account surplus hit an estimated 3.3% of GDP in 2025. The clearest sign yet of an economy leaning on foreign buyers because its own people aren't spending enough. When firms face razor-thin margins, they don't innovate their way out. They race for volume, hoping to outlast their competitors. When local governments face debt and performance pressure, they don't slow down. They lean into more construction and more industrial support. Because the alternative is admitting that the model has reached its limits. When capital gets rolled over rather than reallocated, the system sustains output even as profitability erodes beneath the surface. The numbers can still show growth. The factories can still run. The exports can still flow. But underneath those numbers, the quality of that growth, profitability, household confidence, fiscal sustainability is deteriorating steadily. The world once treated cheap Chinese goods as a stabilizer, and in many ways, they were. But domestic prosperity cannot be built forever on compressing margins, especially as demographics tighten and debt piles higher. An economy can flood the world with supply, and still struggled to generate enough profitable demand at home to keep itself healthy. What made China great, that unmatched ability to optimize production, has begun to generate the conditions of its own undoing. Not because efficiency is a flaw, but because efficiency without balance becomes a trap. And the longer a system runs in the wrong direction, the harder it becomes to change course. So the question isn't whether the machine will slow down, it's whether anyone can stop it or redirect it before it tears itself apart. What do you think? Can China break this cycle, or is the machine already too far gone? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns on the forces reshaping global power, subscribe to Fallen Nations. We'll see you in the next one.